Jake Morrison sat in his small office aboard the space station, working on a puzzle book. The numbers filled neat little squares, and he moved his pencil carefully from box to box. Outside his window, Earth looked like a blue marble floating in the darkness. He had been stationed here for 6 months, monitoring deep space communications for anything unusual. The door chimed, and Colonel Ryan Hayes walked in. Jake looked up from his puzzle and straightened in his chair. The colonel rarely visited anyone personally, especially not junior officers like Jake. "Morrison, we need to talk," the colonel said. His face looked serious, more serious than Jake had ever seen it. Jake put down his pencil and closed the puzzle book. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" "Pack your bags. You're going on a trip." The colonel sat down across from Jake's desk. "A very important trip that could change everything for humanity." Jake felt confused. He was just a communications officer who happened to be good at puzzles and pattern recognition. "Sir, I think there might be some mistake. I'm not qualified for important missions." Colonel Hayes pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the desk. 3 weeks ago, we received a message from something called the Galactic Council. They're offering humanity a chance to join their organization. Jake's eyes widened. The Galactic Council was real. For years, scientists had wondered if other intelligent life existed. Now they had their answer. "But there's a catch," the colonel continued. "To join, we have to pass a test. They call it the cognitive crucible. Only one person from our entire species can take it." "What kind of test?" Jake asked. "The kind that breaks minds," Colonel Hayes said quietly. "Dr. Lisa Park will brief you on the details, but the success rate is almost zero. Most species that attempt it end up with their representatives permanently damaged or completely insane." Jake felt his stomach drop. "And you want me to take this test?" "Your pattern recognition scores are the highest we've ever recorded. Your ability to solve complex puzzles is extraordinary. If anyone has a chance, it's you." The colonel opened the folder and showed Jake several documents. "Look at these. The Vorthak are a species known throughout the galaxy for their mathematical abilities. They sent their best 1,000 minds to take the test. Only 2 survived. And they barely passed." Jake studied the papers. The Vorthak looked like giant insects with multiple brains. If creatures like that could barely handle the test, what chance did a human have? "There are also the Zephyrians," Colonel Hayes continued, showing another document. "They're made of living crystal and can process information faster than our best computers. They sent representatives from their entire civilization. Only one passed." Jake looked at pictures of the crystal beings. They seemed to glow with intelligence. "Sir, if these incredibly smart species can barely pass, why do you think I can do it?" "Because you think differently," the colonel replied. "Dr. Park has been studying the test records. She thinks humans might have an advantage that other species don't." Before Jake could ask more questions, Dr. Lisa Park entered the office. She was a tall woman with kind eyes and graying hair. Jake knew her reputation as one of the best xenopsychologists in the space program. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, shaking his hand. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Dr. Park," Jake replied. "The colonel says you think I might be able to pass this test." Dr. Park sat down and pulled out her own set of files. "I've been studying how different alien species approach problem solving. The Vorthak use pure mathematical computation. The Zephyrians rely on quantum speed processing. The Gornaks try to overpower problems with brute mental force." She opened one of her files and showed Jake a chart. "But humans developed something unique. We created games and puzzles for entertainment. We learned to find patterns and use logical constraints to solve problems. No other species in the galaxy does this." Jake looked at the chart, which showed different problem-solving approaches across various species. "You think puzzle solving gives us an advantage?" "I think it gives you a different way of seeing problems," Dr. Park explained. "When other species encounter the test, they try to overwhelm it with raw intelligence. You might be able to find patterns they miss." Colonel Hayes leaned forward. "Morrison, I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. The test has driven brilliant minds insane. If you fail, you might never be the same again." Jake picked up his puzzle book and looked at it. He had been solving puzzles since he was a child. Sudoku, crosswords, logic problems, spatial puzzles. They all made sense to him in a way that seemed natural. "What happens if I don't take the test?" Jake asked. "Humanity stays isolated," the colonel replied. "We remain alone in the galaxy, cut off from the community of intelligent species. We lose the chance to learn from civilizations thousands of years older than us." Dr. Park added, "The Galactic Council rarely offers this opportunity. Some species wait centuries for an invitation. If we refuse or fail, they might never ask again." Jake thought about Earth, floating outside his window. He thought about all the people living their lives unaware that their species' future might depend on one person solving an impossible test. The test location is a space station orbiting a dead star, Colonel Hayes said. "It will take 2 weeks to get there. Dr. Park will accompany you to provide support, and Ambassador Kate Thompson will represent humanity during the proceedings." "When do we leave?" Jake asked. "Tomorrow morning," the colonel replied. "Jake, I want you to understand something. We're not ordering you to do this. It has to be your choice." Jake looked at his puzzle book again, then at the files showing all the species that had failed the test. He thought about the Vorthak with their multiple brains and the crystal Zephyrians with their quantum processing. They had approached the test with their greatest intellectual weapons and barely survived. Maybe that was their mistake. Maybe they were trying too hard to be clever. "I'll do it," Jake said finally. Colonel Hayes nodded. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you begin the most important journey in human history." As the colonel and Dr. Park left his office, Jake opened his puzzle book again. The numbers and squares looked familiar and comforting. He had no idea what the cognitive crucible would throw at him, but he knew one thing for certain. Every puzzle had a solution. You just had to find the right way to look at it. The journey to the testing station took 2 weeks. Jake spent most of his time working on puzzles while Dr. Park studied files about the exam. Ambassador Kate Thompson practiced diplomatic speeches, though she seemed nervous about the whole situation. Their ship was small but comfortable. Jake had brought 12 puzzle books and had already finished 8 of them. Dr. Park watched him work and took notes about his methods. "You solved these so quickly," she said one day as Jake completed a difficult logic puzzle. "How do you do it?" Jake looked up from his book. "I don't try to solve the whole thing at once. I look for the easy parts first, then use those to figure out the harder parts. Each number I fill in tells me something about the other empty spaces." "You use constraints," Dr. Park said, writing in her notebook. "I guess so," Jake replied. "If I know a number can't go in certain places, that limits where it can go. The puzzle gets easier as I fill in more pieces." On the 10th day of their journey, they saw their destination. The testing station looked like nothing Jake had ever seen. Massive black towers twisted through space, connected by bridges that seemed to bend in impossible directions. Warning symbols covered every surface, written in dozens of different alien languages. "That's intimidating," Ambassador Thompson said, staring out the window. "It's supposed to be," Dr. Park replied. "The station was built to frighten test takers before they even begin." As their ship docked, Jake felt butterflies in his stomach. The station was huge, much larger than it had appeared from a distance. Through the windows, he could see other ships from different species. Some looked like metal insects, others like glowing crystals, and a few seemed to be made of living plants. A mechanical voice spoke through their ship's communication system. "Human representatives proceed to Docking Bay 7. Bring only essential items. Weapons and advanced technology are forbidden." Jake packed his remaining puzzle books and a few pencils. Dr. Park brought her research files, and Ambassador Thompson carried official documents from Earth's government. They walked through the station's corridors, following glowing arrows on the floor. The walls were covered with strange writing and symbols that hurt Jake's eyes if he looked at them too long. Other aliens moved through the halls, but none of them looked friendly. "Remember," Dr. Park whispered, "many of these species have representatives who failed the test. They might not be happy to see us." They entered a large waiting room filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes. Some looked like the Vorthak Jake had seen in the files. giant insects with multiple eyes. Others appeared to be made of gas or liquid, held together by some kind of energy field. A few looked almost human, but with extra arms or different colored skin. All of them stared at Jake as he entered the room. "They're wondering why we sent someone so young," Ambassador Thompson whispered. A tall alien that looked like a walking tree approached them. "You are the human representative?" it asked in perfect English, though its voice sounded like wind through leaves. "I am," Jake replied. "I am Kelthera of the Verdani. My people attempted the cognitive crucible 200 years ago. Our greatest philosopher took the test." The tree alien paused. "He has not spoken a word since returning. The test broke his mind completely." Other aliens began gathering around them. A crystal being that glowed with soft blue light spoke next. "I am Zix of the Zephyrians. We sent 12 representatives over the centuries. Only one passed and she barely survived. The others..." The crystal being's light dimmed. The others were not so fortunate. Jake felt the weight of their stares. These weren't just observers. They were the survivors and families of those who had failed the test. They had seen the cognitive crucible destroy some of the galaxy's brightest minds. "How old are you, human?" asked a creature that looked like a floating metal ball covered in sensors. 28, Jake replied. Several aliens made sounds that might have been laughter, but not the pleasant kind. The metal ball spun slowly. "We sent our oldest and wisest, beings who had studied for centuries. You send a child with puzzle books. Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Jake said quietly, looking down at the puzzle book in his hands. Before anyone could respond, the room's lights dimmed. A deep voice echoed from everywhere at once, speaking in a language that somehow everyone understood despite never hearing it before. "The testing begins now. Human representative, proceed to Chamber 1. A doorway opened in the wall, revealing a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. Jake looked back at Dr. Park and Ambassador Thompson. "Good luck," Dr. Park said. "Remember what we discussed. Don't try to overthink it. Represent humanity well," Ambassador Thompson added. "The whole galaxy is watching." Jake walked toward the doorway. As he passed the other aliens, some of them reached out to touch him. He couldn't tell if they were wishing him luck or saying goodbye. The corridor led to a spherical room with no visible floor or ceiling. Jake found himself standing on what felt like solid ground, but he couldn't see anything beneath his feet. The walls showed swirling patterns that made his head spin if he watched them too long. A voice spoke from the air around him. "I am the examiner. I have administered this test for 3,000 years. I have seen the greatest minds in the galaxy attempt these challenges. Most fail within minutes." Jake couldn't see who was speaking, but the voice felt ancient and tired. "You are human," the examiner continued. "Your species is young. Your technology is primitive. Your understanding of the universe is limited. Why do you believe you can succeed where others have failed?" Jake thought about the question. He could try to sound impressive or claim that humans were special. Instead, he gave an honest answer. "I don't know if I can succeed," he said, "but I think maybe everyone else has been trying too hard to be smart. Sometimes the best way to solve a difficult problem is to treat it like a simple one." The examiner was quiet for a long moment. "Interesting. Are you ready to begin?" Jake opened his puzzle book and looked at the last unsolved Sudoku. 9 boxes, each containing 9 smaller squares. Some numbers were already filled in, others were blank. He had solved thousands of puzzles just like this one. "I'm ready," he said. The walls of the spherical room began to change, and Jake found himself facing the first challenge of the cognitive crucible. Somewhere far away, in the observation room, Dr. Park and Ambassador Thompson watched nervously as humanity's fate rested in the hands of a young man with a puzzle book. The walls of the room changed completely. Jake found himself standing in what looked like a maze, but something was wrong with it. The walls seemed to fold back on themselves in ways that made his eyes hurt. Passages appeared to go up, down, left, right, and in directions that shouldn't exist. "This is the first challenge," the examiner's voice said. "Navigate the 4-dimensional maze. Previous test takers have spent days trying to understand the geometry. Most go insane attempting to visualize impossible spaces. Jake stared at the maze. Other species had probably tried to see all 4 dimensions at once, using their advanced brains to picture something that couldn't be pictured. He could understand why that would drive someone crazy. Instead of trying to see the impossible shape, Jake pulled out his notebook and pencil. He began drawing a simple map. When a passage seemed to loop back on itself through the 4th dimension, he marked it with a number. When a wall appeared to be in 2 places at once, he drew it as 2 separate walls. "What are you doing?" the examiner asked, sounding curious. Making it simpler, Jake replied, not looking up from his drawing. "I can't see 4 dimensions, so I'm turning it into something I can understand." He treated each impossible connection like a rule in a logic puzzle. If walking through passage A somehow led to room C instead of room B, then A equals C under certain conditions. He wrote down these rules like he was solving a word puzzle. After 20 minutes of mapping, Jake saw the pattern. The maze wasn't really 4-dimensional. It was a 3-dimensional maze with special rules about how some passages connected. Like a Sudoku puzzle where certain numbers had to follow special rules. He walked through the maze, checking his map, and following the logical connections he had written down. Within an hour, he reached the exit. The examiner was silent for a long moment. No one has ever completed the first challenge so quickly. The current record was 14 hours. The maze disappeared, and the room changed again. Now Jake stood, surrounded by floating numbers and symbols that moved constantly. Mathematical equations appeared and disappeared, each one affecting the others in ways that made Jake's head spin. The second challenge, the examiner announced, quantum probability matrices. Every calculation changes every other calculation. The Zephyrians sent their greatest mathematicians. They spent months trying to compute all possibilities simultaneously. Jake watched the floating numbers dance around him. This looked incredibly complicated, but as he studied it, he began to see something familiar. The numbers were connected to each other in patterns. When one number changed, it limited what the other numbers could be. "It's like a really big Sudoku," he said to himself. He started with the simplest equations, the ones with the fewest variables. Just like in a Sudoku puzzle, solving the easy parts gave him information about the harder parts. Each number, he figured, out-eliminated possibilities for the other equations. The other species had probably tried to solve everything at once, using their powerful brains to calculate millions of possibilities. But Jake approached it step by step, letting each small solution guide him to the next one. It took him 3 hours, but he worked through the entire matrix. As he placed the final number, all the equations stabilized and the dancing symbols stopped moving. "Remarkable," the examiner said. "You solved in hours what others could not solve in months." "How?" "I didn't try to think about everything at once," Jake explained. "I just looked for the parts I could solve, then used those to solve more parts." The room changed a 3rd time. Now Jake stood in what looked like a timeline that twisted back on itself. Events were happening out of order, with effects coming before their causes. He could see past and future versions of himself making decisions that somehow influenced the present moment. The 3rd challenge, temporal paradox resolution. You must prevent a loop where cause and effect destroy logical consistency. Most test takers become trapped trying to follow infinite timelines. Jake studied the twisted timeline. He could see where the paradox started, a point where the timeline folded back and created a loop. Other species had probably tried to trace every possible outcome, following the timeline through all its twists and turns. But Jake approached it like a constraint puzzle. The paradox existed because something was breaking the rules of cause and effect. He needed to find what that something was and fix it. He identified the key constraint. Events had to happen in logical order. By working backward from the paradox point, he could see which event was causing the problem. Like solving a puzzle where one wrong number made the whole thing impossible. Jake made one small change to the timeline, fixing the constraint that was causing the loop. The twisted timeline straightened out and the paradox disappeared. 3 challenges completed, the examiner said, and Jake could hear amazement in the ancient voice. In the observation room, representatives from dozens of species are watching in disbelief. Jake thought about Dr. Park and Ambassador Thompson. He hoped they weren't too worried. These challenges seemed hard, but they followed patterns just like his puzzle books. "Are you ready for the fourth challenge?" the examiner asked. "Yes," Jake said, pencil ready in his hand. The room changed again, and Jake felt a wave of sadness wash over him. Suddenly he could see images of Earth being destroyed, his family dying, his friends suffering. The images felt completely real and tears came to his eyes. But even while experiencing this terrible sadness, mathematical equations appeared around him. The examiner's voice explained that he had to solve complex logic problems while maintaining perfect emotional control. "This challenge breaks most minds," the examiner said. "They either become numb to emotion and lose their reasoning ability, or become overwhelmed by artificial trauma and cannot think clearly." Jake felt the sadness, but he didn't fight it. Instead, he noticed that the intensity of his emotions seemed to follow a pattern. When he felt more scared, certain types of math problems became harder. When he felt more sad, different problems became impossible to see clearly. The emotions are part of the puzzle, he realized. Instead of trying to ignore his feelings, Jake mapped them like another constraint in the logic problems. The artificial trauma was designed to make certain solutions invisible, but if he understood the pattern, he could work around it. By treating his emotional responses as another type of rule in the puzzle, Jake maintained both his feelings and his logical thinking. He solved the math problems while crying for his imaginary dead family, using his emotions as information rather than obstacles. "Impossible," the examiner whispered. 4 challenges completed. No one has ever progressed this far so quickly. Jake wiped his eyes and looked around the room. "What's next?" Word spread quickly through the testing station. In the observation room, aliens from dozens of species pressed against the viewing windows. They had come to watch another failure, but instead, they were seeing something impossible. Dr. Park stood next to Ambassador Thompson, both watching Jake work through the 4th challenge. Around them, alien representatives whispered in their strange languages. Some sounded excited. Others seemed angry or confused. "This cannot be happening," said Kelthera, the tree-like alien. "Our greatest philosophers studied for centuries before attempting this test. The human is making it look easy," added Zix, the crystal being. "He treats these challenges like simple games." Ambassador Thompson felt proud, but also nervous. Jake was doing better than anyone had expected, but the hardest challenges were still coming. In the testing chamber, Jake finished wiping his eyes from the emotional trauma of the 4th challenge. The room began changing again, and he prepared himself for whatever came next. "The 5th challenge," the examiner announced. "Multi-dimensional chess against an artificial intelligence that exists partially outside normal space and time." A chessboard appeared in front of Jake, but it wasn't like any chess he had ever seen. The board had multiple levels that seemed to exist in different dimensions. The pieces could move in ways that defied physics, and across from him sat his opponent. The AI looked like a shifting cloud of light and energy. It spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I know your moves before you make them. I can see the future of this game. I exist in quantum superposition, meaning I am playing all possible games simultaneously." Jake looked at the chessboard. The pieces seemed familiar, but the rules were unlike anything he had studied. "How do you play multi-dimensional chess?" "You learn by losing," the AI replied, moving one of its pieces through what looked like empty air. The first game lasted exactly 4 seconds. Jake's king was captured before he even understood what had happened. The second game lasted 6 seconds. The third lasted 3 seconds. In the observation room, the alien representatives began to look satisfied. "Finally, the human reaches his limit," said the floating metal ball. "No one can defeat the AI. It cheats by existing outside normal time." But Jake wasn't getting frustrated. Instead, he was getting interested. After losing 12 games in a row, he started to see a pattern. The AI wasn't just better at chess, it was playing by completely different rules. "You're not trying to win," Jake said to the AI after his 12th loss. "You're trying to win in a specific way." The AI's form flickered with what might have been surprise. "Explain." "You could beat me in one move every time, but you don't. You're following some kind of pattern in how you win. That's your weakness." Jake had noticed that the AI always captured his king using the same sequence of moves, just in different dimensions. It was like the AI was solving the same puzzle over and over, but changing the variables. For the 13th game, Jake didn't try to play good chess. Instead, he made moves that seemed completely random. He sacrificed pieces for no reason, moved his king into danger, and ignored basic chess strategy. The AI seemed confused. Its form flickered and shifted as it tried to process Jake's illogical moves. "Your strategy makes no sense. You are playing incorrectly." "I'm not playing chess," Jake replied, moving his knight to a seemingly useless position. "I'm playing a different game." By making random moves, Jake was forcing the AI to break its pattern. The AI existed in quantum superposition, meaning it was prepared for all logical chess games. But Jake wasn't playing logical chess. He was playing something else entirely. On the 13th move, the AI made an error. It moved its queen to a position that looked winning, but Jake's seemingly random knight placement suddenly made sense. He captured the AI's king with his knight. The AI stared at the board in shock. "Impossible. I calculated every possible game. Your victory was not among the possibilities." "That's because I wasn't playing the game you were calculating," Jake explained. "I was playing a different game that happened to use the same pieces." The room changed again. The chessboard disappeared, and Jake found himself surrounded by what looked like an endless maze of mirrors. But these weren't normal mirrors. They showed different versions of reality, each one containing a different version of the puzzle he was trying to solve. "The 6th challenge," the examiner announced, and for the first time the ancient voice sounded worried. "Recursive reality loops. The solution to this puzzle changes the rules of the puzzle itself, creating infinite layers of new problems." Jake studied the maze of mirrors. Each mirror showed a different version of the same basic puzzle, but solving one puzzle changed all the others. Other test takers had probably tried to solve each version separately, but that would take forever, since each solution created new problems. "It's not separate puzzles," Jake realized. "It's one big puzzle that looks like many small ones." He had been staring at the mirrors for 3 hours, longer than any previous challenge. In the observation room, the aliens began to think he was finally stuck. "The human has reached his limit," Kelthera said. "The 6th challenge has broken minds far greater than his." But Jake wasn't stuck. He was having his biggest realization yet. He pulled out his notebook and began writing, not looking at any of the mirrors. "What are you doing?" the examiner asked. "I'm not solving this puzzle," Jake said, still writing. "I'm solving a different puzzle that this puzzle is part of." He had realized something important. The test wasn't really 7 separate challenges. It was one enormous puzzle where each challenge was connected to all the others. The recursive reality loops weren't meant to be solved by themselves. They were meant to be solved as part of the bigger pattern. Jake began working on solutions to challenges he hadn't even seen yet, using information from the recursive loops to understand the overall structure of the entire test. "Incredible," the examiner whispered. "In 3,000 years, no one has realized the true nature of the cognitive crucible." The mirrors began to clear, showing not different versions of the puzzle but different pieces of the same giant puzzle. Jake was no longer solving individual challenges. He was solving the test itself. "One more challenge remains," the examiner said, "but I suspect you already know what it is." Jake looked up from his notebook and smiled. "The 7th challenge isn't really a challenge at all, is it?" "We shall see," the examiner replied. "Are you ready for the final test?" Jake put away his notebook and pencil. After 6 challenges, he finally understood what the cognitive crucible really was. It wasn't a test of intelligence or mathematical ability. It was a test of wisdom. "I'm ready," he said. The room changed one final time. Jake found himself standing before what looked like the most complex maze he had ever seen. It stretched in all directions, with passages that twisted through dimensions his eyes couldn't follow. Symbols covered every wall, changing and shifting constantly. The seventh and final challenge, the examiner announced. The infinite recursion maze. Every step you take changes the maze itself. Every solution creates new problems. This is where the greatest minds in the galaxy have finally broken. Jake stared at the maze for exactly 30 seconds. Then he turned around and walked away from it. "Where are you going?" the examiner asked, sounding confused. Jake walked to what looked like a simple control panel near the entrance. He pressed a button marked with symbols that meant no solution exists. "I'm not going to solve it," Jake said calmly. The room went completely silent. In the observation room, every alien representative stopped talking. Dr. Park held her breath. "Ambassador," Thompson felt her heart skip a beat. "You are giving up?" the examiner asked. "No," Jake replied. "I'm solving the real puzzle." He pulled out his notebook and showed the examiner his work from the previous challenges. "Look at what I learned from challenges 1 through 6. If you solve them correctly, they prove something important about challenge 7. The examiner's form began to glow brighter. "Explain." "The first challenge taught me that some problems look impossible until you change how you think about them. The second showed me that complex systems follow simple rules if you find the right pattern. The third proved that you can fix problems by changing one key constraint." Jake flipped through his notes. "The fourth challenge showed that emotions and logic work together, not against each other. The fifth taught me that sometimes you have to play a different game than your opponent expects. The sixth revealed that all these challenges are connected as parts of one bigger puzzle." "And what does this prove about the seventh challenge?" the examiner asked. "It proves that the seventh challenge isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to test whether I'm wise enough to recognize when a problem has no solution." Jake pointed at the maze. "Look at it logically. If I solve challenges 1 through 6 correctly, the mathematics prove that challenge 7 is impossible. It's not a test of problem-solving ability. It's a test of wisdom and judgment." The examiner was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, the ancient being began to laugh. It was a sound like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. "In 3,000 years, the examiner said, you are the first to understand the true purpose of the cognitive crucible. Most species send their most intelligent individuals, beings who attack every problem with raw mental power. They see the seventh challenge and assume they must solve it, no matter how impossible it appears." The maze began to fade away. "The test was never about intelligence, was it?" Jake asked. "No," the examiner replied. "Intelligence can be measured and compared. The council needed to test something more important: wisdom, creativity, and the ability to think differently when faced with the impossible." The room transformed into a simple chamber with comfortable chairs. The examiner's form solidified into something Jake could actually see, an ancient being that looked like it was made of starlight and deep space. "Humanity passes the cognitive crucible," the examiner announced. "Welcome to the Galactic Council." In the observation room, chaos erupted. Aliens who had waited centuries for this opportunity stared in shock as a young human with puzzle books accomplished what their greatest minds could not. Dr. Park was crying with relief. Ambassador Thompson was shaking hands with alien representatives who suddenly wanted to be friends with humanity. The tree-like Kelthera approached them. "How?" Kelthera asked. "How did your species know to send someone who thinks so differently?" "We didn't know," Dr. Park replied honestly. "We just sent someone who was good at puzzles." "Puzzles," repeated Zix, the crystal being. "Your species creates mental challenges for entertainment. We never considered that recreational thinking could be preparation for real problems." Back in the testing chamber, Jake sat across from the examiner. The ancient being studied him with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. "You solved the test by treating it like your human games," the examiner observed. "This approach has never been tried before." "Maybe that's why it worked," Jake said. "Everyone else was trying to be impressive. I just tried to find the patterns." "What will you do now?" the examiner asked. "Your species will want to learn from your success." Jake thought about that. I suppose I'll teach them what I learned, but I don't think it can really be taught. You either see the patterns or you don't. Try anyway, the examiner suggested. The galaxy needs more minds that think like yours. A week later, Jake stood in a classroom on Earth, facing a group of the planet's brightest scientists and mathematicians. They wanted to learn the secrets of passing the cognitive crucible. The first thing you need to understand, Jake said, holding up a simple Sudoku puzzle, is that the most powerful problem-solving tool humanity has ever developed isn't a computer or a mathematical formula. It's this. The scientists looked confused. They had expected complex theories and advanced techniques. Instead, Jake was showing them a children's game. You want to know how I passed the galaxy's most difficult test? Jake continued. I treated it like a puzzle. I looked for patterns, used logical constraints, and didn't try to be smarter than I actually am. One scientist raised her hand. But surely there must be more to it than that. These were challenges that defeated civilizations with technology far beyond ours. Jake smiled and handed out puzzle books to everyone in the room. Maybe that was their problem. They were trying to use technology and advanced mathematics to solve problems that required something simpler. The ability to see patterns and think step by step. Start with these, he said. Master the basics, and maybe you'll understand why. Humanity succeeded where others failed. We're not the smartest species in the galaxy, but we might be the only one that learned wisdom through play. As the scientists began working on their puzzles, Jake looked out the window at Earth. Somewhere out there among the stars, the Galactic Council was waiting to share their knowledge with humanity. They had passed the test not through superior intelligence, but through the uniquely human ability to find simple solutions to complex problems. Jake opened his own puzzle book to a fresh page. After saving humanity's future, he figured he had earned a relaxing afternoon of Sudoku. Some problems, he thought as he filled in the first number, just needed to be approached the right way.